Okay, you guys can see this, right?
Yes.
Good. I don't know why I always ask that question, but just to be safe. Okay, we're going to finish chapter 9 today. And next week, we are going to talk about the muscles themselves. And I will show you a muscle chart next week, which is the muscles that I want you to know. Not only for the exam, but these are the muscles that are very important. I've picked out, I think, 100 and some odd muscles that are very important. You know, there are over 600 muscles in the body. So you only have to know a fifth of them. All right. Okay, here we go. How do muscles contract? Well, you know, we showed you on Monday the sliding filament theory. We showed you the actin and myosin structural proteins. We showed you the regulatory proteins, troponin and tropomyosin. And we showed you other proteins, and we showed you how muscles actually contract. But how forceful do they contract? The force of contraction depends on, obviously, the number of cross bridges that are attached. And these are affected by 4 factors. Number 1, the number of muscle fibers that are stimulated. If more units are stimulated together, that's called recruitment. So the more muscle fibers in the muscle that are stimulated, the more powerful the force is. Also, the size of the muscle fibers. The bigger the muscle, the more tension it can develop. Muscle cells can increase in size. That is known as hypertrophy. And with exercise, you all know that your muscles can get bigger. Just look at bodybuilders. That's the prime example of how muscle fibers and muscle cells increase in size. They hypertrophy into large muscles. Now, I will tell you that weightlifters and bodybuilders, in my opinion, overdo it, but you can see that they build their muscles into bigger muscles. The third one is the frequency of stimulation. The higher the frequency, the greater the force. The degree of muscle stretch is the fourth. Muscle fibers with sarcomeres that are 80 to 120% their normal resting length generate more force. If the sarcomere is less than 80%, the filaments overlap too much and the force decreases. If the sarcomere is greater than 120% of the resting length, the filaments do not overlap enough, so the force decreases. So the ideal is that the muscle fibers with sarcomeres that are 80 to 120% of their resting length generate more force. Okay? So, high frequency stimulation, large muscle fibers recruited. That means there are more muscle fibers that are getting stimulated. The bigger the muscle fibers are, the more force that is committed. And if the muscle and the sarcomere are stretched slightly over 100% of their resting length, the number that's important here is what we talked about, between 80 and 120%. Okay? And that generates more contractile force. So, how fast does a muscle contract? How long can it be contracted? is influenced by the type of muscle, the load, and the recruitment of multiple muscle fibers. So let's talk about muscle fiber type. Probably the most important. Muscle fiber type, there are two characteristics: speed of contraction and what metabolic pathways they use to synthesize energy. And you know, in biology, energy is ATP. The speed of contraction means that you either have a slow fiber or a fast fiber. The speed at which the myosin protein enzymes can metabolize ATP. The metabolic pathways that use ATP are of two types, and these are the most important things on this slide. You have oxidative fibers, which use oxygen. Therefore, by definition, they are aerobic. Or glycolytic fibers, which don't need oxygen and use anaerobic glycolysis. So the two types of basic fibers that you have when you talk about metabolic pathways are oxidative fibers, which use oxygen, and glycolytic fibers, which use anaerobic glycolysis. They don't need oxygen. Okay? Important. The fiber type is really based on these two criteria. Skeletal muscle fibers can be classified into three types. You can have slow oxidative fibers and fast oxidative fibers. Both of them use oxygen. Or you can have the third type, which are fast glycolytic fibers. Most muscles are a mixture. All fibers in one motor unit are the same type. And it's all genetics. Genetics determines how many of your fibers are oxidative and how many of your fibers are glycolytic. Different muscle types are better suited for different jobs. Slow oxidative fibers maintain your posture. Fast oxidative fibers allow you to walk or run. Fast glycolytic fibers, which are basically short-term and powerful movements. Remember, glycolytic fibers don't use oxygen. So they are short-term, intense, powerful movements, like hitting a baseball, lifting up a weight. Those are fast glycolytic fibers. You don't need oxygen to hit a baseball, in your muscle anyway. And these are the differences. This chart shows you the differences between slow oxidative fibers, fast oxidative fibers, and fast glycolytic fibers. I want you to focus on the primary pathway for ATP synthesis and realize that the oxidative fibers, both slow and fast, use oxygen. Where the fast glycolytic fibers don't need oxygen. They occur in an anaerobic glycolysis pathway. Okay, so that is very, very important. That's very, very important. Let's talk about load and recruitment. What is load? Load are the muscles that contract the fastest when no load is added. The greater the load, the shorter the duration of contraction. The greater the load, the slower the contraction. Recruitment. Recruitment means that you add motor units. And a motor unit is a neuron and a muscle fiber. The more motor units are contracting, the faster and more prolonged the contraction. So that's load and that is recruitment. So let's talk about exercise, because everybody to some degree exercises. Aerobic exercise, otherwise known as endurance exercise, is basically jogging, swimming, biking, and it leads to the development of more blood supply to the muscle. So it leads to more muscle capillaries. It also leads to more mitochondria because you're using energy. And as you remember from the earlier chapters, the mitochondria is where you produce ATP. Mitochondria are energy organelles inside the cell. And you also synthesize the protein in muscle that carries oxygen. And that protein is myoglobin. Myo meaning muscle, globin meaning protein, muscle protein. And that is what carries the oxygen in your muscle. Aerobic exercise results in greater endurance, greater strength, and a resistance to fatigue. Resistance exercise. Resistance exercise is typically an exercise that doesn't use oxygen, like weightlifting or isometric exercises. This leads to muscle hypertrophy, the increase in fiber size. It also leads to increased mitochondria because you're using energy. It increases the myofilaments, it increases the glycogen stores, and it increases connective tissue. It also increases muscle strength and size. Okay? So the difference between endurance exercise and resistance exercise is what we just talked about. Okay? Your muscles get bigger with resistance exercise, not with endurance exercise. All right? To make your muscles healthy, you must remain active. This is what I'm worried about with COVID-19 and the pandemic. Everyone is sitting on their butts. You're in class, sitting on your bed, sitting in a chair. You're not walking to class. You're not getting in your car. You're complacent. And this is called disuse. When you disuse your muscles atrophy. They degenerate. They lose mass. And this is due to immobilization or lack of stimulation by your nerves. You can lose 5% of your muscle strength every day. All right? In someone that is paralyzed, your muscles may atrophy. And when your muscles atrophy, that area is replaced by fibrous connective tissue. And when your muscle is replaced by fibrous connective tissue, it is the point of no return. You cannot rehabilitate that muscle. Okay? So the recommendation every day is to have at least 30 minutes of exercise to maintain your muscle health and your well-being. That's skeletal muscle. You're going to learn about cardiac muscle in Bio 114. But I wanted to talk to you about smooth muscle because that's one of the three muscles. Remember, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of most hollow organs. And those hollow organs are your lungs, your digestive tract, your bladder, and your reproductive organs. It's not found in the heart. The heart contains cardiac muscle, not smooth. Okay? Most smooth muscles are organized in sheets of tightly packed fibers. Most organs contain two layers of these sheets: a longitudinal layer where the fibers run parallel to the long axis of the organ, and contraction of these muscles causes the organ to shorten, or a circular layer, fibers that run around the circumference of the organ, and contraction causes the opening of that organ to constrict. Alternating relaxation and contraction of these layers gives that organ the ability to squeeze substances through its lumen. This is how you swallow. This is how all food gets from your mouth to your anus. It's called peristalsis, smooth muscle contraction in your digestive tract moves food from your mouth to your anus and then out to the outside world. Also in the bladder, you're able to urinate because of smooth muscles. And you can control that. You can control that. Smooth muscle fibers are spindle-shaped. Unlike skeletal muscles, they have one nucleus and no stripes. They also lack the three connective tissue sheaths. Remember, skeletal muscle has three connective tissue sheaths. Skeletal muscle has the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. Smooth muscle contains only one, and it only contains the endomysium. It also contains swellings of nerve fibers instead of neuromuscular junctions. And those swellings are called varicosities. And these varicosities in smooth muscle store and release neurotransmitters. And basically, the neurotransmitter is still acetylcholine. So it is innervated by the autonomic nervous system. Here you can see the varicosities. Here are the varicosities. And inside the varicosities are the neurotransmitters. Smooth muscle has a less elaborate sarcoplasmic reticulum and no T-tubules. The sarcoplasmic reticulum of smooth muscle still stores intracellular calcium, but most calcium is used up for a contraction. And the sarcolemma of smooth muscle contains pouching infoldings called caveoli. And these caveoli contain calcium channels that allow calcium to come in from the outside. From the outside. Remember, there are no T tubules in smooth muscle. So the calcium that is needed comes from the outside of the cell. And it's because of the infoldings called calveoli that open to allow calcium to come in. Okay, so here is the calveoli. It allows calcium to come into the cell, and when calcium comes into the cell, the sarcoplasmic reticulum uses it for a contraction. No T tubules in smooth muscle. Another way that smooth muscle differs from skeletal muscle is that the thick filaments are fewer and there is no troponin. There is no troponin. Okay? It does have tropomyosin, but there is no troponin. All right? There is another protein called comedulin, and this binds calcium. This binds calcium so that there is a contraction. All right? There are really a lot of differences between them, but I think I have talked to you about the ones that are important. This slide is really not important. We talked about the calveoli, we talked about the other protein. There is no tropomyosin. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. All right. So the comparison of skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. All right. This is a good review of the differences, as is this. All these are good reviews of the differences and comparison of the three muscle types. So how does smooth muscle contract? Well, it's very different from skeletal muscle. It's slower and it's more synchronized. The cells are coupled by gap junctions. Some of these cells are self-excitatory. They act as pacemakers in the smooth muscle arena. The contraction of smooth muscle is very similar to skeletal muscle in that the structural proteins, actin and myosin, interact by the sliding filament mechanism. And the final trigger is calcium. And ATP energizes the sliding process. And when the contraction stops, it's because there is no more calcium. It's different from skeletal muscle in that calcium, even though it's obtained from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the majority comes from the extracellular space, not the T tubules. Calcium binds to another protein called comedulin, not troponin. Stopping smooth muscle contraction requires more steps than skeletal muscle. Relaxation requires the detachment of calcium from the protein. Active transport of calcium into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and outside of the cell, and the dephosphorylation of myosin to inactivate myosin. And this is the sequence. Calcium ions enter the cytosol from outside of the cell or from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Calcium binds and activates comedulin, which is the protein in smooth muscle. Only in smooth muscle. It doesn't occur in any other muscle. The activated protein activates the myosin enzymes. The activated enzymes transfer the phosphate to myosin, activating the myosin enzymes. Activated myosin forms cross bridges with actin, just like it does in skeletal muscle, and it shortens from the cross bridges. The efficiency of smooth muscle contraction is it is slower than skeletal muscle. That's really all you have to know. It's slower, okay? It is slower. It's regulated by neurotransmitters, just like it's regulated in skeletal muscle. It's regulated by acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Basically, that's what you have to know about the regulation of contraction. It's regulated basically by neurotransmitters, and that neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Okay? I'm not going to ask you much about the special features. These are not important features. But let's go back. I want you to know the two types of smooth muscle. They're categorized by the arrangement of fibers, their innervation, and their responsiveness. All smooth muscle is characterized into two categories: unitary or multi-unit. Unitary smooth muscle is known as visceral muscle. It is found in all hollow organs except the heart. It's found in your bladder. It's found in your esophagus, in your stomach, in your small intestine, and in your large intestine. It possesses all the common characteristics of smooth muscle. It is innervated by varicosities. It responds to chemical stimuli from neurotransmitters. Multi-unit smooth muscles are in certain places. They are located in the airways of your lung, in large arteries like the aorta. The muscles that control the hairs on your arm, those are known as erecti pilli muscles. And the muscle of the eye, which is the iris. And the iris controls the opening and closing of your pupil. So multi-unit smooth muscles. Know where the unitary smooth muscle is and know where the multi-unit smooth muscle is. I'm not going to ask you to dig into it. Just know where they are. And that is it.